talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and it is Thursday, so it means time for our Thursday Trends episode. Hopping on the show, it's been a minute, my guy, former congressional candidate and attorney, as well as anti-money laundering specialist, our guy, Hector Oseguera. How you feeling?
Feeling good, bro. Thank you for always getting that word salad together. Appreciate it.
Yes, of course, brother. Of course, man. And had to have you on. You are one of our resident political analysts, I would say. And big night last night in terms of the presidential debate. We finally got to see Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in the same room talking about the issue. So definitely want to do a bit of a deep dive into that and all you saw from your perspective. And we'll also touch on what's going on with Venezuela. There was a sanction move by the U.S. where they actually seized the plane, and we know there's been a controversial, to say the least, election that happened over there. And I think it also opens up a big dialogue about immigration policy, but foreign policy, and what more could be done by the U.S. I mean, obviously, the topic of immigration is so popular right now on both sides. I know you are very much opinionated on this topic as well. So I think it just leads to how do we create solutions instead of just continuing to blame different people and accuse people of doing all these different things. So I want to get your take on those two things. So we'll do that for our For the People in the Back segment.
Say it louder for the people in the
All right, man. So let's start with the debate. The memes are already going crazy on the internet. They are starting early. But you know, I want to just hear your honest reaction. I don't want to color it at all. What's kind of your gut reaction when you turned it off last night?
Yeah, my gut reaction right off the rip was that Kamala Harris exceeded the expectations that were set for her, and Donald Trump had rules that were in his favor, but he underperformed the expectations that were set for him. You saw this in a couple of different moments. Like you said, the memes. We're in a generation where basically people have this conception that is 25% Democrats, 25% Republicans, and there's these people in the middle that decide elections. And I've told many times that I think that that's wrong. And that the way that it actually works is that whoever is more riled up, whoever's more energized, that tends to be the group of people that turn out at very high rates and win elections. That's how these things actually happen. And so if you were to judge today by who's having memes, who has the social media in their favor, where the court of public opinion is settling, that is really who is up right now. And I would say clearly it goes to Kamala Harris.
Yeah, no, I definitely have to agree. And I also think it's ironic because the narrative that was a winning strategy for Trump, you know, when Biden was still in the race, was the idea that Biden's old, he's senile, he basically, his mind is leaving him. And without having that Biden next to him, Donald Trump now very much so looks like the old senile person, can't stay on topic, can't really finish a thought cohesively, is all over the place, and is like, you know, fixated on these sort of one topic things and can't get away from them regardless of what the line of questioning is. And even, you know, I mean, there's so many moments within that, right? I mean, that were obviously ridiculous and just so, for me, the thing that comes to mind is I'm saddened. Saddened by the fact that the other major party in this country delivered this candidate to the American people. And on a sidebar to that, I'm saddened by the fact that so many people are enamored by him, even after all that they've seen, all that they've heard, and a man who literally couldn't even identify policies that he would put in place to help these people out. And what's scary is that they don't seem to give a damn. So I'm curious for you, you know, you talk about the idea of being energized, and that's necessarily who wins these elections. Do you think that we might see a de-energized Trump base when it comes to this election just because of how poorly he performed?
Well, the reason that Trump, I think, has been so successful is because what you're doing is analysis for what would normally be true for most politicians. But with
Hmm.
Donald Trump, is not like most politicians. It's more like having a favorite wrestler or a favorite
Mm.
sports team. You're gonna show
Sure.
up for them no matter what. No matter.
Hmm.
Look, I'm a Knicks fan. I'm showing up for them forever.
Sure. Right.
So in a way I understand that concept, but what you have to
Hmm.
deal with is that these people are not going away. They've made their
Mm.
choice. They know who
Yeah.
their favorite character is, and they're gonna stick with it no matter what. What that really puts on the other side to do is to have somebody responsible or somebody who appeals to people. There was such a big dynamic before when it was Trump and Biden. This group
Hmm.
of voters called the double haters. I hate both of them.
Hmm.
I'm not voting for
Right.
anybody, right? Well, now that one of those people is gone,
Hmm.
necessarily those some of those people are gonna be shaved off, and they're not gonna go to the other one because they didn't like that person to begin with.
Right.
That's what I think we're seeing. That's what that initial bump in energy was for Kamala Harris, was
Hmm.
these double haters now have a different choice. And they're not
Hmm.
making Trump because that was already a choice. So
Right.
they're flooding into Kamala Harris's campaign. And that's positive. But again, it's about keeping the energy up. Do I think the Trump people are going to be deflated? I don't think so. Like I said, they've chosen their favorite character. They're never going to
Hmm.
be deflated. That is
Hmm.
a barrier. He's not going to sink below that number. And
Hmm.
for Trump, it's a very high number compared to most politicians. It's a very high number. So, like I said, what that really puts on the Democrats is that they have to put up somebody who was going to generate the sort of things that we have seen from Kamala Harris's campaign. And, I think it has been a positive turn of events. And you can see it from the fact that Trump doesn't want to give up on Biden. He still wants to be running against Biden.
Right, right. Yeah, he kept bringing up Biden many times throughout that debate, to the point that Kamala Harris even had to say, "You're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me."
Right.
And I mean, there's a lot of things I want to touch on, but you touched on something that I find to be interesting, like the double hater concept, right? And a lot of that, I think, is also centered around the Israel and Palestine conflict that's going on right now, where you have a lot of Democrats feeling angry that the Democratic Party is aiding Israel as far as weaponry goes, but B, not coming out and doing enough to help the Palestinian people. Many people, using the word genocide, as the innocent, kids are being killed that we're seeing, all over social media.
Yeah.
So for you, I mean, how do you kind of process that bit of yourself, of that bit of information, of I guess, what would you say to people who are still conflicted with that thought process of thinking like, but if a vote for the Democratic Party right now is a vote in me sort of aiding all that's going on over there?
Right. And I understand that, and I've heard that argument made many times. And
Hmm.
honestly, you have to cop to it that on the issue of Israel, the parties are basically the same in a lot of ways. What you're going
Hmm.
to get is on the margins, who's going to be better and who's going to be worse. Now,
Hmm.
who would Donald Trump be more pro-Palestinian than Kamala Harris? I don't think so, personally. If anything,
Sure.
Kamala Harris is more likely to err on the side of where the people are, which is to have some more respect for the dignity of the Palestinian people. Like you said,
Hmm.
people have called it a genocide. And who's gonna speak more to that side? Is Trump? I personally would not think so. So if it is
Hmm.
on those issues where the difference honestly is gonna be marginal, and I've heard a lot of Muslim activists tell me as well, we understand the government of the United States is gonna be pro-Israel regardless. But
Hmm.
who's gonna give you marginally better results? In my opinion, it would be Kamala Harris. In my opinion,
Hmm.
other people can look at it and I think people could judge for themselves. Who's going to be better on that? What is Trump going to be better than on that? I personally wouldn't think so.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I 100% understand the anger, frustration, and I think it's not, and it never will be, a perfect or ideal candidate or situation, right? You're always going to have things that you wish one of them did better, right? And and I hate the argument of voting for the lesser of the two evils, and I particularly hate, the Democratic Party, because the platform basically is, it's like, you have to vote for us because the other guy is so bad type of thing, right? They've ran on that for so long, and I understand the disenfranchisement that many people feel having to once again show up to the polls and do that, and swallow that bitter pill. But I think, it's nuance, right? And it's what's the bigger picture at the end of the day. I think you can disagree with some of the actions or lack of actions that the Democratic Party or the current president has had in regards to the Israel and Palestine conflict, but you also have to say what's happening at my front door and what is the potential future for what's happening at my front door if I don't participate in this, right? I mean, look at how Donald Trump was speaking of immigrants, specifically like Haitian immigrants, going with these crazy conspiracy theories of them taking people's pets and eating them, right? Like, he's spewing hate, and I'm sure we're going to find cases like we have with other things he said in the past where all of a sudden the Haitian community is under attack by crazy radicals who believe everything that this man says, right? So, I think, again, it is not an ideal situation, but not participating, sitting it out, you are literally, not to be dramatic, spitting in the face of all the people that gave their life so that we each have the right to vote and participate in this thing called democracy, which by nature is going to be imperfect regardless of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I have the kind of perfect response to the people who are like, well, I don't want to participate at all, right? The biggest constituency in America did not vote. That's the largest group of people. So if those people voted, they would change the result because they're the biggest group in America. So by definition, by choosing to participate, you can have an effect on the outcome. By choosing not to participate, by definition, you will not have this part of that decision making, and you're basically saying that you're good no matter who gets chosen. To me, to not participate is the ultimate way of saying both are going to be the same, because you're not going to have a say. You're saying whatever everybody else picks is what I'll go with.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's nuance, and I think we have a problem with nuance in this country, in this world, social media, right? And I think you can speak to this as an attorney. That's why there's different degrees in, let's say, like a murder case, right? There's manslaughter, there's first degree, second degree, third degree, because it's not as simple as, oh, this person died, this person was responsible, throw them in jail for life, right? There are levels to intent. There are levels to, all that happened within that case that has to be considered when actually, taking into account how to properly sentence the person that is guilty for said murder, right?
Absolutely.
And it doesn't change the egregiousness. It doesn't change the sadness of the fact that somebody is no longer with us, that their family is mourning them. But you do have to go with the actual process that is at hand and be able to understand it and try and do your best to effectively come to a conclusion that is the best case scenario possible given the results that you have, given the situation that is at hand, right? And I kind of view the idea with politics and things of that nature as well, just like that, where, it's not a perfect scenario. Yeah, there are going to be things that you wish were different, there are going to be actions that I wish were taken more of, right? And when me voting in this election is not in support of all that they're not doing. It's me expressing what I think is going to give us the best opportunity for a better future in general, right? And regardless, someone is going to be fucking elected at the end of the day, right? Regardless, one of those two people is going to be in office. If you sit out or you don't sit out, one of them is going to be in office, and you have to basically choose which one of them you'd rather have at the end of the day. And that's a harsh reality for some. It's a bitter pill, but it is the reality. And a lack of action is really throwing your hands up and just saying, hey, do with me what you please, essentially.
Yeah, and look, I agree with that 100%, and I would take it one step further, because my frustration with all of this is that this difficulty with nuance is something that we have to deal with on our side. The other side, they don't care about nuance. Asian people eating pets, that's not nuance. They know what they're doing. We're the ones, when you try to motivate people to do some good, that's when you have to get people on board. You got to get
Mhm.
them to say that they want to participate in it. But their side, they don't need the nuance. They're going straight
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, 100%. That's something we have to keep in mind as well. They literally, if this man says something, they don't care about fact checking whatsoever. They will believe it and run with it, and that is incredibly dangerous because that is literally what a cult does. And people in cults will literally do whatever the leader is telling them to do, no matter how crazy or ridiculous it sounds. I mean, we saw January 6th being the result of that, right?
Right.
And I don't want to harp too much on just shitting on Donald Trump because that's the easy thing here. Anything that you saw from Kamala Harris that you wish maybe she would have expounded upon, or you think that she could have done better?
I do. I do. Look, I'll give her props because the common thing that people would say about Kamala Harris is that she would not prepare for these moments. There have been other
Mm,
things that she's been caught flat-footed, and people have gotten the better of her, with the Lester Holt thing being a big one.
mm-hmm,
She's had a lot of these moments. What I'll say is that she clearly did a good job preparing for what
mm-hmm,
she was going to engage in. What I wish is that she would have given some more direct answers. Whenever you
mm-hmm.
get a yes or no question, they always talk around it. Always.
Yes.
I would rather just say yes or no right off the bat, and then you could talk your
Mm-hmm.
way around it.
Right.
A little bit more specificity. Like that's for me because I'm an activist. I'm in this stuff. Like I care about policy. I care about where you're gonna end up on certain things. That stuff matters to me. I
Mm-hmm.
understand we're in the social media era where maybe that stuff is not going to come across the way it would
Mm-hmm.
come across to someone like me who's deep in this stuff. So I understand why it is, but I would have personally liked to hear more on the policy side. Obviously, I understand that. Look who you're debating. Like, how much policy are you really going to talk about? But for me
Mm-hmm.
personally, I look for that stuff. That's what I want to know. What are you going to try to like? She talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of general ways, the opportunity economy and these sorts of things. But I care about what those numbers are going to be. What are we really talking about? What are we going to invest in? Where are we really trying to go as a society?
Yeah, I agree. I think that was one of my bigger critiques as well. Is to a degree, I think she did amazing without a doubt, but I think to a degree it still felt like politics as usual with the sort of twisting around ways to not answer a question directly to your point. Even the one that stood out to me was the topic of abortion, which to me should be an easy layup. They asked her if she basically supported late term abortion, and she didn't give an answer. She sort of like, he was already like shooting himself in the foot, so she kind of like allowed him to Donald Trump to hang himself and get her off the hook almost in that moment. But she didn't clearly just be like yes or no, right? Which those things do bother me. That the fact, and I will say, to be fair, I get it. Like there's so much on the line there. One misstep could possibly derail your entire, election. I mean, we saw it with the guy who I think he was the bureau guy with the, I can't remember what the hell his name was years ago. From the Democratic Party. I think it was it Democrats. I don't know
Yeah,
what the fuck
it
his
was
name is.
Howard Dean, the
Howard Dean, that's what it was. Yeah, right? So that one moment derailed his whole fucking campaign because it was just a live moment where he got caught up in the energy of everything, right?
right.
So I get what's at stake, and it's even worse now because that was pre-social media. In a social media era, this will live forever, So I get that. But it does sort of raise an eyebrow of like, okay, but where do you actually stand, right? Because if you can't effectively stand 10 toes down on a particular policy, can I really trust you at the end of the day, right? When we talk about moving forward and we talk about, this is something different, a different generation, you're still participating in a bit of the political game. As much as I understand it, it still is a bit frustrating to watch and see.
Yeah, man. Like I said, like whenever you get a yes or no question, just answer yes or no. Like that would be,
Right.
I think to the viewer, that would be very satisfying because at least now you
Mm-hmm.
know where you stand. Then
Yes.
kids start expounding upon it. And, honestly, that shows that she was very prepared. Like you said, a bad moment could live forever. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
they had gone in trying to throw out bait to Trump
Mm-hmm.
for him to
Yeah.
take, and clearly that worked. But
Mm-hmm.
in doing that, that time that you're throwing out that bait, you're not giving people that meat and potatoes of like what is the policy actually gonna be. Which again, like you said, this is social media world. Like one moment is what you're trying to get this whole campaign to be about. So,
Hmm.
I understand why it happens, but yeah, a little more on that specificity, I think would go a long way with people who are looking for that stuff or want to know what are we talking about.
Yeah, and to be fair though, to play devil's advocate on my own argument, to be fair, one of the critiques that I think a lot of us have had of Democrats in the past is Trump is playing a very different game, and Democrats were still trying to sort of, be this sort of um, stoic and like not basically drop down to the floor with Donald Trump essentially, right? And that was a lot of the critique of like, listen, this guy is throwing haymakers at you guys, and you're standing there trying to debate somebody who literally is just putting on a show, right? And you're not matching that energy, and he's giving off the impression that he's winning because of that, right? So to be fair, she basically beat him at his own game this time, right? Like that, and she's the first one to really do so. As you said, she brilliantly baited this man into hanging himself on multiple occasions. I mean, the one that comes to mind is the crowd size one, right? We're talking like literally saying, I encourage you to go to a Donald Trump rally. You'll see people leaving there early. And that one little line, he couldn't not respond to it. And that was like the turning point where he just started losing his shit a little bit, a little bit more at a time. And you could watch her almost like laughing but holding back laughter because she realizes how easily she's manipulating this man to really show his true colors and just lose his shit right there on national television. So to be fair, in that regard, Democrats are now playing the clickbait game that Donald Trump was so good at, and they are beating him at it.
Right. And it's not an easy game to play because other people have
Mm-hmm.
tried. Look, Hillary Clinton tried the pearl clutching strategy and it didn't
Mm-hmm.
work. People were like,
Yep.
you sound phony. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you remember back in his first Republican primary, Marco Rubio did try to go at him in a sort of Trump type of way, but it didn't work for him either. So it's not like you could just clown him back and forth and think that that's going to work for you. There's that saying, you don't argue with fools because people from distance, right? You don't want to get
Mm-hmm.
that game. So Kamala Harris learned how to do it, but not look like him, which is not easy to do, and she deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, exactly. There's a poise that she was able to maintain throughout that, and it was like she said just enough to not like make herself look like she's engaging,
Right.
but enough to like rile him up that would make him just be the aggressor, right? Whereas Joe Biden, to like as a comparison, would get frustrated and say and would himself then start arguing about his handicap in golf, right? Like that, like he all of a sudden he became this like the bumbling idiot arguing about nothing at all. Donald Trump brought him to that level, right? Where Kamala Harris was able to sort of, and I'd imagine that is the prosecutor in her that has that skill set to really read a person that she's going up against and understand that there are eyes on her watching the way that she's going to react to those situations and doing just enough to make that person really show their true colors. And I thought that was incredibly brilliant. So I mean, let's kind of wrap up the conversation around this. I mean, I know when you and I have talked in the past, you were never a Biden guy, right? You were never somebody who was overly enthusiastic about what you had seen from Democrats. I think even post 2020 election, we were kind of on the same page where it was sort of just kind of like, all right, well, we won that, but it's not necessarily overly exciting beyond the fact that we don't have to deal with Donald Trump anymore.
Right.
What are your thoughts now when you see this ticket of Kamala Harris and someone like Tim Walz being her VP candidate?
Yeah, I think it's been a really good turn for the Democrats. Like you said, I was never really a Biden guy. I was actually a Bernie guy in
Mm-hmm.
2020. And after that, I would have been a Elizabeth Warren more person. Before I was
Sure.
in and what you see now, especially with the pick of Tim Walz, I think Kamala Harris is showing respect for
Mm-hmm.
my side of the Democratic Party, the one that's young, energetic, the people
Mm-hmm.
who are like, if you throw me a bone, we'll vote for you.
Mm-hmm.
Show us that you're willing to engage with us, and we'll vote for you. Tim Walz comes from that side of the party, the more progressive side, that I think
Mm-hmm.
it's because you have a very interesting dynamic where in a lot of ways, Kamala Harris is the more conservative one on the ticket. She's a former
Sure.
prosecutor, she has that history. So this is a very interesting ticket. I think it's the type of ticket that looks like a winning ticket. It looks and feels like a winning ticket whereas the Trump ticket doesn't really look that way. If you compare, especially JD Vance as a
Mm-hmm.
pick, the common parlance is that VPs don't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just to complement your ticket.
Right.
Where it does matter is if they damage your ticket more than
Mm-hmm.
normal, or if they help your ticket more than normal. And you have
Mm-hmm.
that, I think, exact dynamic where JD Vance is weighing down the ticket and Tim Walz is bringing up the ticket. So you're in that odd scenario where the VP picks were so, I guess, out of left field for what people usually
Mm-hmm.
pick, that they're complementing and hurting in ways that are not normal. So I think that the Kamala Harris ticket right now, the Harris Walz ticket, is looking like a winning ticket. We have a lot of time. I'm waiting for the October surprise to happen, as
Mm.
usually happens. But until then, it definitely goes 1-0 Harris over Trump.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of summarize it. And I wanted to actually real quick, we're talking about you know, advocacy and being somebody who is out there, you know, in the streets and the idea of protesting and all those different things. What do you feel like is missing from modern activism, right? And I asked that question because I think back to things like Occupy Wall Street, right? Where great energy around it. People are like, hey, what's going on over here? And that's kind of what you want to start that conversation, but literally did nothing whatsoever in terms of changing anything, right?
Right.
And even, you know, in regards to all the conversations around what's happening to the people of Palestine, um, and a lot of protests happening, a lot of people speaking out about it, but where are the actual plans? And this is something I get frustrated with about even with Puerto Rico. I went to a Puerto Rico rally and a lot of great energy, a lot of people who care. But where are the actual plans that are going to be put in place to actually make something happen rather than us just, you know, yelling about it in the streets or on social media? So I guess for you, what do you think is lacking in modern activism that we need to improve upon, I guess, in this generation?
Yeah, and I think that that gets to the core of the question in a lot of ways. And my answer is the activist interaction with power and how
Mm,
they interact with power is the missing chord, because we have not figured out a way to give our demands to the people who have the power to make those demands real and then make
right.
them behave the way we want them to. The right does this very well. They have
Mm-hmm.
schools, they have fellowships, they have systems where they bring people up in corporate America and other
Mm-hmm.
institutions in universities, things like the Skull and Bones from back in the day, these little
Mm-hmm.
social clubs where we're all going to be successful together there, and we're going to be the people in charge. So we'll just tell each other what to do. The
Mm-hmm.
left and modern activism hasn't made that step from being people out in the streets to having institutions that
Mm-hmm.
then tell the people in power what to do and have leverage to make them do what we want them to do. That
Mm-hmm.
is, at its core, to me, the left's interaction with power is really the missing piece of what we need to accomplish before we transition from being these people with a lot of energy and with a lot of, street power, but no
Mm-hmm.
institutional power.
Yeah, I think and because I think back to like the civil rights movement, right? What is some of the things that really pushed that over the finish line, you know? And a lot of that was Martin Luther King Jr. did have those relationships with politicians, right? With presidential candidates. You know, that's partially why he was actually critiqued, you know, to a degree by people like Malcolm X, who are a bit more militant in their thought process and not necessarily wanting to play the political game, right? Not wanting to have to interact with these you know, white politicians essentially.
Right.
But you know, that obviously is the winning formula, the winning strategy for lasting change, right? I think it's a brute force, especially in 2024, is just not going to be the winning option that changes anything. It literally is going to be spun around as you guys are just crazy people, just like Occupy Wall Street, you know, was that, oh, these are just a bunch of hippies who have no jobs and blah 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 complaining, right?
Right.
And you know, or people who have, you know, there was the guy who in protest lit himself on fire in protest for Palestine.
Yes.
That you know, is just something that the powers that be will point to as, oh, was a crazy person. Look how radical these people are, right? And to your point, it's I don't know what it is about that. If there's a lack of patience in our generation, because we have to understand that in order to enact those things, like in order to build those relationships, it's a lot of rubbing elbows and politicking to a degree, right? And maybe we're over that. Maybe we're so frustrated and disillusioned by everything. But unfortunately, it's like you have to play their game to a degree. You have to find a way to get in the room, and the only way to do it is to be willing to do a little bit of that give and take, as dirty as it might feel.
Right. And you said the MLK versus Malcolm X strategies. You got to look 40, 50 years later, which one was more successful. Some of MLK's contemporaries, like John Lewis, became people in power who were able to pass laws and were able to make some change. Not all the change that we wanted, right? But wouldn't it have been better if the people who were not on the Malcolm X side also were people who in our contemporary world were people in power and were people who were making these decisions? We maybe live in a generation where everybody wants instant gratification. People want to be able to tell the government how they spend their tax dollars. You're not going to be able to do that, but you can elect the person who's going to pick where your tax dollars go. And so you might not have, it's not a direct like link, but you can have an effect on these things. Like we were talking before, it's about participating. It's about getting involved, and that's also what I wish. I wish more people would get involved. I always need more, more homies in the streets. I always need people voting every election. I always need more people to speak their minds and to say what sort of society they want. But, in a way, it involves interacting with the people who make the decisions for what happens in our society. If you're not willing, and at the other thing I want people to understand is that at the end of the day, every single person is a human being. They're going to react like a human being. If they know you, if they have a relationship with you, if they are willing to have a conversation with you, they're going to behave very differently from somebody who they think is going to mistreat them or attack them or say something bad about them. That's the nature of humans, and that's how we are. So don't think that, well, if I throw a brick through this person's window, then they're going to do what I say. Because would you do what somebody says if they
right.
window?
Yeah. No, I'm 100% on board with that. And I think we do need to do a better job of getting on board. And even if you're not the person on the front lines, I mean, what are the organizations locally that maybe you can contribute to, right? In some sort of way, even if it's giving a couple bucks, to help. Because I mean, this shit costs money, and at the end of the day, you have your own life, you have a family, right, that you have to be concerned with, right? You have a job, and as much as you're passionate about the activist stuff, it's not worth you also being homeless on the street with your family, right? So it's a balancing act. So the ability to spend more time on working on the issues of that people are concerned about is going to require a certain level of funding and a certain level of organization, right? So it's like there are different levels that we all could get involved in this, and myself included. And I think a lot of people think just because they're not the type to want to go give speeches or whatever it might be, we all have a part that we could play if you truly do care about this. And even, like, to your point, at the bare minimum, just showing up and fucking voting at the end of the day, right? Just doing a little bit of research and voting not only for the president, but in all your local elections as well, that are arguably more important to your everyday life as a citizen of this country. Now, I wanted to talk about Venezuela for a second, because I think it leads into the bigger conversation of immigration, which obviously was one of Trump's big obsessions yesterday to keep going back to. So we'll talk about that, but I'm gonna take a quick break here and then we'll be right back. All right, so I had talked about this on the podcast, as it was happening, but obviously there's a lot of controversy over the election in Venezuela. A lot of people feel, and there's a lot of evidence that shows it was probably stolen from the people. You had record voter turnout in that election, and still, Nicolas Maduro ended up being allegedly reelected, right? Allegedly, according to him, he won, right? So, and a lot of the topic at hand in this country about immigration is the idea of villainizing these people, right? And acting as if they're coming out here, hands open, looking for a free and easy ride, and to take everything that you and your family have ever worked for, right? That's the narrative that people like Donald Trump are pushing. And a lot of there's a lot. I think there's a lot more nuance again to this conversation than people probably want to understand or want to realize. And to me, if you are against sort of having an open border, then you should be pro U.S. having a better foreign policy that can aid these countries to then allow their governments to not be taking advantage of the people to the point these people are fleeing because they think their life is at risk, essentially, right?
Right.
And we did see the U.S. pull what people are saying kind of a bold move in as far as a sanction move goes, where they actually seized the Venezuelan president's plane while he was in Dominican Republic, while it was in Dominican Republic, and they did this because he violated the sanctions that the U.S. government has placed against Venezuela, right? So obviously this isn't something that necessarily moves the needle, but it is sort of a showing of a bit of like, hey, we're going to be on your ass a little bit. But I guess, let's zoom out about foreign policy, and from that lens of somebody who feels like we are letting too many people in the country, what are you kind of proposing then is what the solution would be?
My ultimate solution would be for the United States to stop getting involved in other people's governments and overthrowing people for the purpose of installing a government that's more friendly to American business interests. Because that's really what you have going on in Latin America. And that's why you have certain governments like the Venezuelan government and like the Cuban government that are shut out of the world economy and made to suffer, or attempted to be made to suffer, for the fact that they don't want to participate in the American system. So in Venezuela, you have a dictator, Nicolas Maduro, and he's going to stay in power as long as he can hold on to that government. Why? Because America keeps trying to go into that government and destabilize it. And when you do that, you empower certain people who say, look, these evil Americans are trying to overthrow us. Let's all band together and essentially steal from this country. The reason I hate stories like that with the jet being taken is because that's not what happens with sanctions for the most part. Does that happen? Absolutely. But the people who truly suffer, who are made to suffer when the government enacts economic war on a country, are the regular people of that country. That's what actually happens, is that the regular people who just want to feed their families and have a safe life, just like every single American, they're unable to buy groceries, unable to go to a doctor, unable to do all of the things that we in America could do whenever we want, however we want, as long as you can afford it. Those people run from that country because it's under horrible circumstances. They run, they take their families, they go to a place that they're told is more safe, more free, has more opportunities for you. What is that place? It's America. So to me, my ultimate solution is maybe we should stop trying to overthrow these governments. Maybe we should stop trying to force American business interests onto these governments, so that maybe they will start to elect people who, whether we like it or not, are going to do what those people want. Maybe then those people will stop running from those countries and stop coming to America and doing all the scary stuff that you're so afraid of, right? But until America makes the conscious choice to stop going into Latin America and other places across the globe, Ukraine, Yemen, all, I could just name all continents, all these wars that are going on, because America wants American business interests to have a hold in these countries, and we will not accept it if these countries say no. And so we enact sanctions and do all of this stuff. That jet plane is one example out of probably, there's those things. And me, who works very close to sanctions programs and understands how these things work, that's not what happens, because these guys have all these different sorts of ways of evading sanctions. These guys have, these countries are cut off from us economically. People who are viewing this and don't hear too much about this stuff should Google BRICS, BRICS, which is a group of countries that are coming together and say, well, if America doesn't want to mess with us economically, we'll just do our own thing, and then we won't have to mess with the dollar. Because the reason that all this stuff works is because the globe takes American dollars. You go to any country in Latin America with an American dollar, and you know how they treat you, versus local currency. They want American dollars, not local currency. And that gives us a very unique place in the world. Other countries are starting to say, well, maybe if America doesn't treat us right, we can do our own thing. We don't need the dollar. And that is going to be the thing that truly brings America to its knees. Because the reason we're able to have these very affordable, these very comfortable lifestyles in America for those who can afford it, is
Mm-hmm.
because America does these things overseas. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's really a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. We do these things to these countries to have nice things over here. And
Mm-hmm.
we want to give up these nice things over here. So are we going to stop doing those horrible things over there? Nestle chocolate, look at what they do. Look at all these corporations, that the water that we drink,
Mm-hmm.
everything that we do, you cannot buy from these people. These are the
Right.
people that truly have a say in what our governments are doing. So to me, until we stop trying to go into other countries across the world and tell them you have to accept our business interests,
Mm-hmm.
those people are not going to stop running away, and you're going to be scared for until the end of time, because that's just what happens. If you destabilize a government, the people will leave and they're going to go somewhere that they think is better.
Yeah. So for clarification, your approach would be that you think they should be working with so regardless, all right, it's a dictatorship. Regardless, if we don't value, that's not our American value, we should still maintain a healthier relationship with them than trying to get them to convert to what we believe in, essentially.
Well, we do it when it benefits us, because we do it with Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia, right? Saudi Arabia,
Uh-huh.
do they have our values? Do they do what
Uh,
we, you know what I'm
right.
saying?
China.
In China, yeah, I mean, I could
Mm-hmm.
go on and on and on with the
Right. Right.
countries
Right.
that
Yeah.
we choose to say, okay, even if you don't do what we like, we'll have a good enough relationship with
Yes.
you. But then
Yes.
they're the ones who say we don't want that, and then we say, okay, well, we'll overthrow you until you do want that. So
Right.
to me, my approach would be stop overthrowing them. Stop trying
Mm-hmm.
to interject with sanctions. The best time we had with Cuba is when we started opening it up with Obama. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows if we would have continued down that road, if maybe the communists would have fallen by now and they would have a totally different government. We don't know, because we didn't go down that route.
Right. Right.
Maybe
Right.
if for once we go down that route instead of the we'll keep sending bombs and trying to overthrow
Mm-hmm.
you, or wage economic warfare, maybe then you'll get a different result, right? Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and
Mm-hmm.
getting a different result. Either we're insane or we like the result that we're getting.
Right. Well, I mean, this is actually fascinating to me because I feel like it's not. I've never really actually heard anybody put it in that way before, because it is ironic, right? You have a place like China that we literally do tremendous amounts of business with. I mean, I can go around this room right now, and the majority of the things in it probably were made in China, right?
Right.
So we have no problem working with them because it's beneficial to us, and our American businesses want to keep that connection open because it benefits them and their profit margins, right? So we can look past the dictatorship that they have. We can look past the fact that the people there aren't getting real information, right? I mean, and that's it's fascinating to put it in that way. But for some reason in Latin America, oh no, we can't have that. We need you to completely adapt to everything that we are saying, right? And if not, we're not going to work with you, and we're also not going to do any real trade with you, and therefore your economy is going to struggle as a result, right? And I think it's it's interesting. I mean, what do you think is the real motivator there, right? Because to your point, let's say the powers that be are these corporate companies that are kind of pulling the strings, right? That are benefiting the most, let's say, from somewhere like China being such a trade partner for us, right? Why wouldn't they want to go into a place like Venezuela and be able to do the same exact thing they're doing in China, right? And take advantage of manufacturing, or play like coffee and all these different things that are native to these areas that we could be getting far easier. Why do you think they're not pushing harder for that same sort of practice?
The thing is, they are, but the people there are saying no, right? So
Mm,
we overthrow them. Like that's what they want. The American business interests want them to say, "Let us in," and they're like,
right.
"No, we're going to charge you to come in." And
Mm,
you see that's the ultimate thing about it, is that yes, they want that, they want the access, but they're not being given the access on terms that they want. That's why
mm,
people say we overthrew Iraq for the oil, because American and other global oil companies want access to their oil, and they say
yep.
no. And honestly, if you didn't know, or if any of your viewers don't know, look up where Venezuela is on oil production or on oil capacity. It's very high up there. So
Mm,
in some ways you could draw the very same lines. That's why they want in, but the people there are saying no, or yes, but on terms that are beneficial to us. And the American business interests are like, no, we just want it. Give it to us.
Right. It's a fucking tangled web of all types of shit, right? And and unfortunately, as what always sort of happens is the ones that are going to be villainized are going to be the everyday people, right? Whether it's you and I or whether it's the people escaping persecution in those countries, they're going to be the ones being blamed for whatever's happening over here, right? Rather than being able to zoom out and say, well, what's actually the bigger, and again, like I'm obsessed with nuance because it's like we just have to dig a little bit deeper in everything, right? I think we've been trained psychologically. I don't know if it's the way school system and societal norms and things like that. It's like, let's accept the first superficial answer and just run with that, rather than like saying, you know what, if this is a complex issue, the truth probably isn't on the far left or the far right. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, and we're just not trained to dig that deep into it. And that's, I think, the sad part about all of this.
Yeah, man, and it's so horrible because the only ones that suffer are the poor of both countries. The poor in America
Yes.
villainize the poor from Venezuela and otherwise, and then it goes back and forth. Meanwhile, the elites of both countries live comfortably the whole time.
Right.
We are the ones who have to wage these wars of hatred and of discrimination and
Yep.
all this stuff. We're the only ones that have to suffer this stuff. The elites in both nations sit very pretty and love the way things are going, and at the end of the day they're happy that things are the way they are, honestly. And yeah, it is very horrible. I that's why I preach, and the people I talk to are the people on the ground, and that's why I interact with those people, because if change comes, it's going to be through the people who are most directly influencing and affecting things.
Yeah, and again, to your point, the ones that are affected are the poorest, and that's why, to a degree, I something that changed my perspective. When I moved out to the suburbs here, and I have a business in a predominantly like blue collar white town, traditionally white town. A lot of these people are struggling. So and the Trump supporters, but I understand you're pissed off because it's like, yo, I'm working 40 hours a week. I'm doing what I was supposed to do. I got a trade. I have a job. I'm doing, and I'm still just barely getting by.
Right.
I'm pissed off. So I understand the frustration. Do I think their anger is obviously misguided? Yes, but the poor are suffering regardless of you are white, black, brown, whatever it might be. You're poor is poor. Being poor sucks. Struggling, living paycheck to paycheck, not being able to provide for your family, not being able to take a sick day when you need it, or not being able to fucking get, health coverage or pay for health care, whatever it might be. That sucks regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. And unfortunately, because of the political game and the divisiveness which has only gotten worse because of somebody like Donald Trump, we're going to continue to suffer because they fooled us into seeing red or blue rather than actually seeing like who the fuck cares the most or has a real plan of action regardless of what your political party they align themselves with.
Right. And even better is who is ultimately responsible for these conditions. Because in that way, if you look at it through that lens, Donald Trump is the perfect like manifestation of taking all this anxiety caused by the Donald Trump class and then selling it to the underclass as, actually, why don't you just hate these other people instead of hating me, who has actually created these circumstances?
Yeah, no, and it's a sad, it's a sad state of modern society, and yeah, I don't know, those are things that keep me up at night, because it's just if they really just dug a bit deeper, just a little bit more critical thinking, I think we'd be a far better place. But that's a like utopian pipe dream of mine.
Every time you want to dig deeper, just hit me up, bro, because I'm up thinking about the same thing, bro.
I appreciate it, bro. Anything you want to push people to that they could go check out?
The New Jersey 2025 elections are coming up. I would just tell people to stay tuned and, look out for your local elections. Definitely stay in touch, register to vote, and, watch social media. I hope to have something to share in the maybe not too distant future.
Love it, my bro. Well, listen, you always have a place here, a home to share what you got going on. At what is it? Oseguera 201 is the Instagram.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, listen, brother, I appreciate your time and your insight as always. And of course, we'll have you back on soon.
Thanks, bro. Always good talking to you.
Man, big shout out to my guy Hector Oseguera for hopping on the show. Always love getting his perspective. And I actually wanted to touch on some positivity as well. I wanted to bring Hector in for, the debate analysis and some of that foreign policy stuff. But y'all know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I've been hypercritical of particular artists from our community about not doing as much as they could be doing. And I have to say, I've been not humbled, but, the message has been heard to some degree in the form of Bad Bunny recently this last week. So I want to talk about that in our Mi Gente segment. Got to celebrate the good as always. Mi Gente. All right, so Puerto Rico has its elections coming up November 5th, if I'm not mistaken. And this broke while I was actually over there. Bad Bunny did a podcast with a YouTuber named El Tony. And just for context, if you've been listening to this podcast consistently, you probably are aware of the fact that I have been hypercritical, or if you follow me on social media, I've been hypercritical of a lot of artists not utilizing their platform to really do all that they can be doing. Specifically, I've called out people like, Bad Bunny or Residente, and calling them to do a lot more. I think I've probably been the hardest on somebody like Bad Bunny. And while I don't want to over celebrate this, because to me this is still kind of the bare minimum, but I do appreciate the fact that he's taken a stance and actually put himself out there in some sort of way, right? Because I think that's difficult in today's social media era. It's difficult for the average person, let alone somebody who has, millions upon millions of followers and has all types of things on the line as far as, partnerships and whatnot that they have to be considerate of when they, make a statement publicly or they do something, right? So Bad Bunny was on that podcast I mentioned, or did an interview with the YouTuber El Tony. And, they touched on a lot of different things, but what he began to go viral from this interview was him talking about his love for Puerto Rico, him talking about wanting to raise his kids in Puerto Rico, and not feeling like he could confidently do that given the current state of things, and him talking about, the political party in Puerto Rico that has really been a detriment to the island. And this is a party that is in favor of statehood. And they're the ones who have been, in office, in power for years at this point. People just keep voting in the same political party and nothing really changes, right? Things honestly have gotten worse. So Bad Bunny has been calling for something different. He is encouraging young people to go out and get registered to vote, to protest with their vote. All amazing things. And not to toot my own horn, but if you can recall, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Why not hold some sort of a concert and everybody, who goes, it's free if you have a voter registration card, if you register to vote. And, I don't have a direct connection to somebody like Bad Bunny. But it seems like the message was heard, whether it was me echoing something else or whatever it was, the message was heard or the same conclusion was drawn. And as a result of him going on this show and talking about that, there actually has been an influx of young people registering to vote in Puerto Rico. And it's interesting. I'm reading this article from We Are Me Too. It literally just dropped today. They're saying Bad Bunny's comments seem to have motivated young voters in Puerto Rico. As it stands, 75% of voting age people under 21 are not registered to vote. After Benito's call to action, there have been mass voter registration drives to get people registered before the September 21st deadline. Damn, 75% of people 75% of voting age people under 21 are not registered to vote in Puerto Rico. I mean, that pisses me off to no end, but I'm gonna harp. This is Mi Gente. We're gonna harp on the good. But what's also cool is I actually did see then an event happening at Vivo Beach Club. They're throwing like a little mini festival over there in Puerto Rico. And it's free to attend as long as you have your voter registration card, or they actually will have on-site voter registration happening at the event. And it's like, man, this is so fucking simple. Why did it take so long? I'm trying to stay positive. This is a beautiful moment. Somebody is taking action who has a great platform like Bad Bunny. Obviously, there's an issue where voting people, people under the age of 21 not being registered to vote in Puerto Rico, and literally it's their future on the line. So it's incredibly important. Now, do I wish he would organize a large-scale event to really drive this home? Yeah, I do. I wish he would do something on the island to really drive this home and make people show up and show out. But, this is a great start. Another idea would honestly be that hold a concert in Puerto Rico after November 5th, like November 6th. And anybody who has, proof that they voted, I'm not sure what it would be, they get into the concert for free. Right? So all these little things that could be done. And, but to his credit, he did get out there and decided to do this interview and decided to have this conversation, and it's having an effect. And this is the type of shit that I'm talking about, right? Like, this is the bare minimum. And I don't even mean that in a denigrating way when I'm having this conversation. But literally look at the effect that this person has. The influence that he has. He just sat down on a interview with a YouTuber, mentioned that the young people need to get out and register to vote and have their voice heard. And literally, you're seeing young people in droves go out and do so. So while I understand it's not in their job title to do things like this, look at the fucking power and influence that you have and the agent for change that you could be just by doing little things like this. Imagine if you decided to take it a step further and do some of the things that I've been talking about. So, I don't know, just a beautiful moment. Again, I think it proves to my point that I always am trying to make, there's a responsibility that comes along with, or there should be a responsibility that comes along with having a platform like that because of how influential you are, and why not want to be a person of influence for good, changing the things and the lives of the people you claim to love so much. So, listen, salute to Bad Bunny. I hope we take it a step further, but this is an amazing start. I wish it happened, a little bit sooner, but hey, anybody that listens to this in Puerto Rico, I know I have some listeners out there. Make sure you are registered to vote. You are making sure that your voice is heard. I know that at times it feels like you're being ignored, but, as we talked about with Hector earlier in the show, it's like you don't have a right to complain, essentially. If you're not going to bother to show up and make your voice heard, then you can't complain when things are going awry, because you decided to sit out and not participate in trying to make things better. So, and that goes for anybody here in the States as well who still isn't registered to vote. But yeah, beautiful stuff. Now, I want to touch on the debate real quick in our Ask A Gringo segment, get some of y'all's take on it.
Ask a Gringo.
I have a question. All right, so I simply asked people for this, just like, what was your reaction to the debate, right? And be honest, we could do it, we could do it, anonymously, whatever made sense for you. And I got a few responses. What I also noticed was I had people who were afraid to, I guess, have their point known to a degree, which I get it. And it's scary in today's social media era. Also, I'm going to broadcast on a podcast, so I get it. But I don't know, just interesting stuff. So first one that I got here, I'm going to read a couple. At MartyAbe84 says, Harris killed it, period. She flamed him. I think that's an accurate description of it. That's what most people are saying. Even when you watch clips from Fox News, they're talking about that it wasn't Donald Trump's best performance, that he kind of dropped the ball there. So I definitely would agree that she had the better showing. And honestly, she also had the most to lose out of this. So she really had to rise to the occasion, which in my opinion, she did. At Cross_Soul says, I thought both sides did not look good. We need to hold both of them accountable. And I wish you would have elaborated a little bit more on that. I'd kind of be interested to hear what you thought Kamala didn't do well on. I mean, I mentioned this earlier in the show. I think my critique of, like, it still felt like we were playing a little bit of the old political game, a little bit of ducking very direct questions. And again, as I mentioned, I kind of get it. I get it. I don't love it, but I get that there's a lot on the line, and people are very conscious of one misstep sort of derailing everything, especially everything gets clipped in today's culture. There's a lot riding on it in general, but when you have a culture that will turn everything into something, you have to be very careful, about what you do and don't say. And I get how that feels very inauthentic at times. But it is a reality that I think we have to sort of be aware of and a little bit empathetic to, I think, to a degree. As much as it's like, listen, just tell me what you fucking believe in, right? Don't perform for me. Just tell me what you believe in. And I get the frustration in that. That would be my only critique. But I think, with that aside, if we're talking about sort of who looked good and didn't look good, Kamala Harris was poised, in control, in an environment that many people before her who are seasoned politicians sort of began to act out of sorts, that Donald Trump got under their skin and, as he's very good at, created a show and made them look bad. And Kamala Harris was actually able to beat him at his own game and manipulate the conversation to her liking, which was impressive. And to be fair, she came out the gate literally, boom, this is my policy. These are the big things that I want to do when I step into office day one. And truthfully, Donald Trump really, aside from the conversation around tariffs and things like that, that was the only sort of matter-of-fact plan that he had for anything, right? Even when it came to healthcare, he literally said, I have a semblance of a plan. Like, what? Bro, you had time to prepare for this debate. You've been out of office for almost 4 years where you're planning this big comeback, and, you haven't taken the time to think about something as important as healthcare, which is probably one of the top things that many people in this country are struggling with, is getting affordable healthcare. Again, I think that tells us all we need to know about that person, and Donald Trump was more interested in talking about himself and refuting claims about himself than talking about the American people. And he didn't come across as presidential. I've said this at the beginning of the podcast. To me, it was very sad that this is the other candidate on the major party of the United States. I think it makes us the laughing stock. I think Kamala Harris was impressive and did look presidential personally. But yeah, I'd definitely love to know more about what you thought looked bad as far as Kamala Harris was. I mean, I think I wonder how much of the critiques against Kamala Harris are internal bias that maybe some of us aren't aware of to a degree. And I'm not like pointing fingers or calling anybody out in some sort of way, but I did have an interesting conversation with a friend of mine, and I'll reference that as well. So aside from the responses on Instagram, I did have a friend of mine call me yesterday, and she is, conservative leaning. We have really open, healthy conversations. I don't agree with her on everything, and certain things we do agree on. But she leans conservatively, and, for her, watching that debate, as much as I don't know what else you sort of need to hear at this point from Donald Trump, she was hoping to hear a bit more of his plan or what he was going to do in contrast to Kamala Harris, and she was disappointed by that. And she had a very self-aware and honest moment that I appreciated, and she talked about how, visually seeing Kamala Harris up there and some of the faces she made and sometimes the way she talks, she can't help but have sort of a negative reaction to the woman Kamala Harris. And in a very honest moment that I appreciate, she was saying, I don't know if it's maybe I have some sort of internal bias against the idea of a woman being president, or for whatever reason I can't wrap my brain around that. And I appreciate sort of calling yourself out on something like that. We all have various internal biases, right? Things that subconsciously we automatically think of or color our lens in this world, right? And I think it's not meant, we shouldn't be shaming each other or ourselves for some of those things. It obviously, now if you decide to take action in a negative way that is harmful or spew rhetoric that is harmful, that you should be judged by. But I think there are, certain things. It's like we were all raised, if you're of a particular generation, that President of the United States was a man's job, right? It's Mr. President, right? And even the idea of what do we call the first man now, right? I'm so used to it's the first lady, and now it's Madam Vice President. That sounds weird, right? Madam President. So those are all little things, right? That don't particularly roll off the tongue naturally, or don't come to mind naturally because of our own preconceived biases, because of how we were raised and sort of what was standard in the world. And I understand that, and I think some of us need to have an honest conversation with ourselves about what really bothers us, and I'll sort of kind of put a period on it, with I even some family members and whatever, through marriage or whatever, I've talked about this, that I have some Trump supporters, and one of the commentary that came from one of them was Kamala Harris is disgusting. And it's man, I was jarred by that comment, but it's a lot to unpack there, because it's what is disgusting about this woman? She's a person who's achieved incredible amounts of things in her career, defied all the odds, and gone on to, at this point, be the vice president of the United States, and is potentially somebody who could be our next president, the first female president, the first a woman of color, all these different things, right? She's intellectual, she's an attorney, she is all these different things, and for the sake of the conversation, it's and she's not physically appalling to look at or something like that. So what is disgusting about her? Right. And that is a reaction you're having, is something that is deep rooted in your subconscious. And I don't know what it is. I'm not going to, is it because she's a woman of color? Is it because she's a powerful woman? Is it because she's an outspoken woman? Is it because she's a woman who is unafraid to go on the attack? And again, I'm not trying to, villainize anybody. But these are real conversations that we have to have with ourselves, and a lot of things like that were said about Hillary, and what is the subconscious bias that many of us have, right? I mean, and shit, this is beyond politics and things. This exists in all aspects of our world. There was the idea for a long time that black men in playing football couldn't be a quarterback in the NFL. Right? That was the standard was your white, homegrown, middle America type of guy was the quarterback, because they would be a great leader, and black men would not be able to lead a team, or they were not intelligent enough to play the quarterback position. And now, through years of progress, that has shifted, where you have a very diverse class of people playing quarterback in the NFL and college and things of that nature. But that was a common narrative, right? We were raised with that. We were raised with the idea of oh, it's interesting that there's a black guy playing quarterback, right? He's the abnormality almost. So I think all of us, myself included, I'm not saying this to make anybody feel bad about themselves. We all have these biases, right? And I think the only thing that I think, we can do and what we should do is have a real conversation with ourselves about why do I have this reaction to this person? Especially again, somebody like Kamala Harris, who is intelligent, has a great track record, well-educated, didn't come from, having a rich background or anything like that. So many things that are, if that was my daughter, I would be so fucking proud of her, right? Beyond proud. So why is it that we have an issue with many people can't seem to wrap their brain around it or be okay with her on that stage? You know, and I think again it's an internal conversation and dialogue. But I would challenge anybody who's sort of having an issue with her beyond policy stuff, and you're just having like a personal reaction. Explore that a bit more, because there's probably something deep underlying there that you know you are carrying that really isn't serving you or serving the greater good of the world at the end of the day. Just some food for thought. With that said, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, so I mean, we talked about the debate like to fucking exhaustion. It was there. It was obvious. The memes are coming out. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think for me, my greatest takeaway from it all is a bit of sadness that like this is where we are. I saw on, I don't know if it was TikTok or Instagram, people like had created a compilation of like previous debates from like Nixon all the way to Al Gore. And what was really a stark contrast was the amount of respect that those people on that stage, those men on that stage, displayed for each other, even if they were running against one another, they were opponents, and even though they had a different ideology, there were so many times where they would be quoted in that video of saying like, I'm not going to get into personal attacks. I'm not going to. Both of us have the same goal, a better America. We just have different plans to get there. And the American people are not voting upon who they like better, but whose plan they like better. To summarize, kind of. And I believe that was the exchange between like Nixon and Kennedy. And that really made me sad, you know, kind of like reflecting on this current cycle. And both sides are obviously going at one another. Now, you know, this is where I think a bit of the hypocrisy lies when it comes to the right. I think you would have to say a lot of this started with the right. You know, I think a lot of this. I mean, listen, and this has been bubbling, and I don't. The Democrats aren't like clean on this, but I think it's been bubbling for a long time, and then somebody like Donald Trump just fucking lit the match, basically, right? Like the gasoline has been being poured on for a long time, and then Donald Trump just fucking took the match and blew everything up and created the climate we're in now. And unfortunately, Democrats have had no choice but to now get down in the dirt, right? And like I mentioned to Hector earlier in the show, it was like, you know, as much as I wish it was just about policy and things like that, one of my critiques in the 2020 election was like Donald Trump is like hitting below the belt, and Democrats are trying to play, you know, like old school politics, and you have to hit him. You know, unfortunately, that's people want these memes. People are responding to that, so you have to sort of adapt to the current political climate, as much as I don't think it's a healthy one. And I think, you know, that is what makes me a bit sad, is like the fact that this politics has to be played in this manner, rather than like, hey, here's my plan, here's what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. I have respect for somebody even if they have a different ideology than me, right? I don't, or just because they say they're liberal, I don't automatically write them off as somebody I hate. Just because this person's conservative, I don't write them off automatically as somebody I hate. Like, that's where we used to be. You know, there was a mutual respect and a trust that everybody was in it for the right reason for the most part. Again, they just had a different way of getting there, and I think we've lost that. And, you know, I feel like Donald Trump going away would hopefully help get us back to a healthier place, right? Like, I think a second Donald Trump loss would prove that this sort of ideology and this strategy of division and hate are not a winning strategy, and we need to reverse course is what I would hope for as far as like the Republican Party goes. And that's why, to me, it's so important for him not to get involved. Because if he wins, it's like, oh, this is the winning strategy. Keep dividing the country. You don't need everybody to love you. You just need the right amount of people to love you, and fuck everybody else type of thing. And that's just not American, right? Like there's just because you have a difference of opinion and just because you don't support the current power that be doesn't mean that you should be neglected or forgotten about or written off, I think. And to be fair, last thing I'll say on that, devil's advocate, I think Democrats probably did a bad job of that over the decades of ignoring a certain class of this country, like poor white people. And as a result, you have a very angry group of people who are going to be very susceptible to the messaging of somebody like Donald Trump. Now, with this idea of like foreign policy in Venezuela and all these things, I think Hector brought up a really interesting dialogue, a really interesting conversation, right? The U.S. imposes all these sanctions on places like Venezuela, and in doing so, basically destroys much of their ability to legally create wealth for their economy. And we say we do this because they're communist regimes and have dictators, but we also have no problem turning a blind eye to a place like China and doing a ridiculous amount of business with them. So there is a hypocrisy there, and I think, to what we were talking about, it's like if you feel like immigration is an issue and there are too many people coming here, then what can we do to work with these countries so that their economy isn't struggling, so that, people aren't, living in dire circumstances that they're trying to escape from? And I think the point he brought up is one that I haven't really heard, and I think it's definitely one to be explored a bit deeper. And then lastly, with Bad Bunny and, encouraging people to vote and doing this interview, I salute him for it. I think obviously more could be done. I think here's the thing. I think somebody like Bad Bunny cares, but maybe doesn't feel he has the complete grasp on all that has happened and should happen to give him the comfort to really go out and be talking about this and in environments that aren't controlled, right? Because I'm sure this interview was very much controlled by his team. Again, I get it, it's a lot on the line, but I think even beyond that, like I said, you don't have to be this political expert that can go toe to toe with the best pundits in the world. I think you can do what you do. You have that platform, and it's amazing, and you are definitely responsible for getting a lot of young people to vote, to register. But like I said, how do we make it even bigger beyond just words, beyond just spending a Thursday afternoon for an hour getting an interview recorded? How can we take it a step further to really mobilize people even further? Because again, if he's having that much of a fucking impact just by saying a few words during an hour-long conversation about this, imagine if you were on the street, hosting events, putting on events, doing that. How much bigger would the impact be? How much more energized would the youth be of Puerto Rico? And again, for all I know, I'm going to put this out, and on fucking Tuesday, he's going to announce a show or whatever, and to doing the same thing. I really hope he does. But yeah, I salute him for doing this. Obviously, the impact is there, and this is why I push for this so much, because these people have so much power and influence to do good, and I would hate for it to be wasted, is always my point. With that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. We will be back on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Until then, stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Peace.